Hi, my name is Riley Allen. This is my review of Chapter 1 of Outlander, titled A New Beginning. So, to start off, Outlander is a romance slash historical fiction slash adventure slash fantasy type thing. It's a whole thing. So, we start off with our protagonist, Claire Randall. And the things we learn over this chapter was this chapter takes place in Inverness, Scotland, 1945, after the wars ended. They must have got out of war and went straight to vacation, which is fair enough, because the war, at least for a European side, ended in 1945, so they didn't miss a beat. I also don't know what time they're in, so they personally might have just got out of the war, but the war's still going on some fronts. I don't know. But anyways, they're on vacation. Her and her husband, Frank Randall, are trying to, rekindle their marriage, as they haven't really seen each other too much over the last 6 years. As since the war broke out, he went straight to officer training school and joined the intelligence department at MI6, I believe it said in the book. Okay. And she became a nurse, where she was stationed in France. We learned that she was orphaned pretty young, and she was raised by her uncle, Quentin Lambert Beauchamp, a archaeological historian, and that's how she met her husband, Frank, because he was a consultant to her uncle. We also learned that this is a vacation before they start their new life in Oxfordshire or whatever, somewhere in there, because he has a teaching position there. Frank does, as a history professor. Good for them, nice job, okay. We also learned that due to her upbringing and the war, she's never had a home that was her home, a permanent home. So we first things first, the relationship. From the first few paragraphs, I actually feel like they were a couple. They have been married. There's chemistry there. I did like the little bit about they were laying in their bed, but their nosy matron, they were staying in an inn. So the nosy matron, Miss Baird, was vacuuming the carpet, and they said, "That must be the dirtiest patch of carpet in all of Scotland." The character Frank said that, and Claire said, "Almost as dirty as our kindly matron's, mind." That got an audible laugh out of me, that got an audible laugh. So they kind of separate and make plans, I suppose. He goes somewhere. I can't remember where he's going, where Frank went, but she went shopping. And she ended up buying 2 vases, whatever you want to call them. Because, as she said, she's never had a home to have a vase. So she has vases. And this is where we get exposition that she does botany. She's into botany. And her husband comments that maybe she'll put flowers in there instead of in his books, as she presses the flowers into using his books, whatever. He is a historian, and that's why they're there, I guess, because Scotland's got a storied history, and he's meeting with a friend, Reverend Reginald Wakefield, who's Reverend Dr. Reginald Wakefield. Who's a vicar, something like that. That's what they called him. So they meet back up at Miss Baird's inn, and they see blood. And Claire gets suitably worried for seeing blood. Now, I will say this. I don't know why she didn't notice it wasn't blood. I feel like as a nurse in a war zone, she'd know what blood dried and or wet looks like. But, okay, fair enough. But she didn't. But okay, fair enough. She is suitably freaked out until, like, Frank comes in with a history dump, like, basically dropping lore about it's probably just a chicken's blood. Dropping some history, some lore. Now, whether this is true history and true lore, I don't know. I'm going to trust Diane Gabaldon, however her name is said, and that this is real history. I'm not fact-checking. I don't particularly care about folklore history. That's not my niche of history. Like the folklore part of it. I'm gonna assume she did her fact-checking. This is real and not some... But if it is pulled out of her, just fiction, it was a neat and entertaining little story. So they find out that apparently everybody's in the pub. So they go there, and we meet Mr. Crook. No, there we meet Mr. Wakefield first, Reverend Wakefield first. And he and Frank get into a very long discussion. As Claire notes, they've both got the gleam in their eyes, so I'll leave them to it. She meets Miss Baird, who's talking with Mr. Crook, an older gentleman who's also into botany, but his botany is different. Like, he doesn't bother with plant presses, but his nephew gifted him some plant presses, and he offers them to Claire, which she does. And she also asked him to show her where some of the other rare plants would be. And I guess once he gauged that she was serious about it, he agreed. Agreeing to meet up to the next day. Which she enjoyed because it would give her excuse not to go with Frank to look at some historical papers at the town hall or whatever. Well, they eventually do go back to the inn with Miss Baird, and she and Frank get to talking about how Scotland has some very well Norse roots due to the Vikings traveling through, I think it said 500 to 1300 AD. So they got a lot of Norse roots, and the Viking lore basically helped transcend into the Scottish lore, folklore and whatnot. Also, the reason they had chicken's blood is because apparently folklore reason said when a house was built, they'd bury a body and for, like, good luck or whatever, basically. Kill a dude and bury him for good luck. Sounds great. But, of course, they've matured as a society, so now they only use chicken's blood. And the reason they're doing this is because I guess people with superstition were fearing that the war was caused because they didn't christen their homes with chicken's blood, so they're doing it now to prevent World War III. Now, if this is real, and this actually happened to some people after World War II, I don't know. I haven't looked it up if this is based in historical facts or anything. It seems so weird. It seems a weird bit of history that I believe it would be some type of real. But I don't know. And so he goes on to talk about ghosts at some points, you know, and the different festivals like Midsummer, Beltane, Hallows Eve, and Hogmanay, I don't know. So they get to the inn, and Frank goes to meet Mr. Bainbridge, who is a solicitor and another historian. Claire doesn't want to meet him because they met him before, and he offered her tea, but it was scorching hot to the point where she now has blisters, so she correctly dropped the thing onto his lap, which was an accident. They kind of smoothed it over, but also she ended up swearing, saying, which apparently was not something ladylike, because she was doing her best to be a gentle, demure woman of standing. Apparently saying bloody fucking hell when you drop boiling tea onto yourself is not very ladylike. They ended up smoothing it over because they're both Frank and Mr. Bainbridge are both historians, so they started talking about the history of profanity. And Claire chimes in and says she heard a new one from a American soldier named Williamson, who would always say every time she dressed his bandages, or changed his bandages, Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ. That's so random and funny. I like that one. So she tries to set the mood by lighting. So the power goes out, and she decides to make lemonade from the lemons, lighting some candles, making sure the light switch is turned off, so if the power comes back on, it doesn't ruin the ambiance and the mood. She puts on her cologne, which she knows Frank likes. And the mood is immediately ruined because Frank blows into the room, blows out some of the candles because he's seen a ghost. He explains it, and Claire's, not really believing it until he mentions that it was windy, but none of his, kilt or coat were billowing in the wind. And she says, yeah, okay, that is freaky. But she tries to rationalize, he didn't disappear. He just was obstructed by the trees and all this. You may think he was close enough to brush you, but he wasn't. Maybe he was just actually from here, and I don't know. And then he brings up, asking if she's treated some Scottish people at the hospital. And she goes on to say that she did. Joking with him about it. About how one person said who hated getting injected with needles so badly he'd suffer the pain, which is fair enough. I also hate needles. Hate them. Which is, fair. So it isn't until later, after they're laying in bed, that she questions why he wanted to know that, because she said he must have known that she has treated all sorts of people at the hospital. And he basically says, well, 6 years is a long time. I assumed he might have been a liaison of yours. And she was blunt with it, a romantic interest of mine. And she denies it, saying that she has been loyal for him for the past 6 years. And he believes him, he kind of smooths it over, flirting a bit. But as she's lying in bed, she realizes, she has the same realization that I had, ooh, Buddy's only he says, smooths it over by flirting, saying, I love you. I'd forgive you even if you did. And I'm sitting here thinking, were you cheating? And she has the same thought. She says, there was no infidelity on my part. My part. Girl smelled the shit. So, nothing. Also, we got our name of the book because she was called a Sassenach. They were called Sassenachs, and Frank explains it just means Englishman, or at worst, Outlander, which they both are. Yeah. I personally thought this chapter was a bit long. Well, no, not long. It was a bit dry. It was a bit dry, so to say. It was a bit dry. It had some funny moments and a good, exposition dump, and it blended well, but at the same time, it didn't really get so much as picking up into the last bit of the chapter where the accusation of cheating came in. Everything else, it was just set up, kind of dry exposition. I do believe that Claire and Frank are married. They do have a certain chemistry to them, and I like that. I like that you can believably think they have chemistry, I like the characterization of Claire so far, that she's just completely disinterested with the history of it all. Like, she booked it the first chance she could. When Frank and Wakefield started talking about history. Overall, I'd give this chapter about a 6. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video. Leave a like, comment, subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the next video.